This is Out of Bounds. If it's happening in the world of golf, we're talking about it. Coverage, debate, discussion, pro golf and local golf. Let's do it. This is Out of Bounds. And here are your hosts, Nate Sharman and Josh Durso.
All right, welcome back to Out of Bounds. Josh Durso and Nate Sharman here on this Monday morning, breaking down all the action from Sunday and this past weekend at Bay Hill. Akshay Bhatia captures his third career win at Arnie's Place after a playoff with Daniel Berger. Nate, quite a weekend down there in Florida.
Yeah, that's for sure. Akshay gets his third win. He's only 24 years old, which is just shocking. You know, Akshay chases down Daniel Berger, who had the lead most of the week. He fires that back nine round of 31, including 4 birdies and an eagle to catch Daniel Berger and eventually get him in a playoff and win the playoff there. And it's just unbelievable for Akshay. Like I said, he's 24, 2 years younger than even a guy like Ludwig Aberg. And he's got 3 wins already. And this by far is his biggest, is his signature win, right, to look back on. He's won at Arnie's Place, and it's just amazing what the young lefty will have in store in his career.
Yeah, and this really opens the door for him, right? Like this really changes things. He hadn't had a signature win. Now he does. And I think heading into not only the players, but into major season, all of a sudden with 3 playoff appearances in those career wins of his and closing out every single one of them, that is mighty impressive. And he starts to become a possibly enticing pick for bigger events.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. He's gonna be looked at definitely very closely for the President's Cup team this year, and then who knows how this goes. The sky's the limit for this kid. This kid's obviously a gamer, right? It seems like on all 3 of his wins we were just talking about, he chases somebody down, right? So he's this guy that when the going gets tough and he can rise to the top, right? Proving he can win at Bay Hill, which we'll continue to talk about, which was one of the hardest golf courses on tour. He proved he can do that and came into the day 2 shots back. The lead ballooned up a little bit more as he got to the back 9 for Daniel Berger, and Akshay runs him down and gets the victory.
Yeah, I mean, at one point he was around 5 shots back. And, he just rattles off that really impressive final 9, 5 under 31. Nothing not impressive about that. Birdied 10 through 13, eagle on 16, just a really, really good performance from start to finish. But you know what? Anytime we see him playing well, the biggest thing trending on social media is not his play, but his putting. Nate, let's talk about it. What do you think?
Yeah, there's so much discussion whether Akshay's anchoring or not, right? He just got that big, long broomstick putter, and you can't really tell if he's, got that anchor to the body or not, or if it's just anchored to his shirt or whatnot. And, I think we'll have this discussion, right, of whether he's anchoring or not. And I think it's really important that you need to preface this by, if the tour is not going to come out with distinct rules on this and they're not going to rule about it, then Akshay's doing absolutely nothing wrong and he should continue to do what he's doing. But it's just like pace of play. The tour is never going to say, here's a white line and there's crosses it. We're just going to continue to have this large, immense gray area where guys are going to live, right? And we're going to not be able to figure out whether A, he's anchoring or not, or B, whether he's not anchoring, right? But one thing I will say, Josh, and it seems like to me and to other people on social media, these last few weeks when it's been heightened, right, when they've been talking about Akshay possibly anchoring, you're not seeing as many close-up shots on the broadcast of Akshay putting, right? You're seeing the behind the ball shot, or maybe not a direct on shot of Akshay. It seems like they're not showing him as much with the close-ups putting to avoid some controversy, I guess.
Maybe. I mean,
would you agree with? Did you not see that as much, or
it's just one of those? Well, the one shot that I saw quite a bit yesterday, or it felt like I was seeing it more, was like this aerial shot. I don't know if you saw that in the broadcast at all.
Yeah.
But kind of like imagine a drone sitting directly over the player's head,
right,
and watching down as the putt happens or the putt rolls. Interesting. I didn't really think of it that way, honestly. I guess it hadn't really occurred to me that maybe they were doing that. And
you can't tell at all if he's anchoring from that shot. You can't tell it at all. There's no way you can tell from that angle, right? Whether he's got his hand, because anchoring is defined as he's got his hand anchored to a part of his body, right? And it's permitted where like if Bryson DeChambeau, everyone knows how he putts, where it's anchored to his forearm, right? And I think that's permitted. There's no problem there. You're just not allowed to anchor that putt that top of the broomstick putter to your body, right? And you talk about a guy like Adam Scott, who is clearly not anchoring. He's got that that more towards out of his body, the top of the putter. And I think a guy like Lucas Glover also comes to mind, where he's also got that broomstick putter out. So I don't know if it's banning the broomstick or what they should do. Do you have an idea of what the tour can kind of do to maybe eliminate this sort of gray area that they have?
Rule on somebody.
Yeah.
I don't know if you make an example of somebody or you call it out in the middle of a tournament or what the answer is. One thing I'm going to say in Bhatia's defense is, unlike a lot of other players that use the broomstick putter, his shirts in the chest area aren't that tight. They're kind of loose.
Skinny. He's so damn skinny.
He's got right. Like he's 130 pounds soaking wet. Like his shirt up top is a little loose. So like, yeah, it may look like the fabric of his shirt is brushed up against his hand. Does that mean it's touching his chest and he's anchored? I don't think so. At least that's the way I see it. But again, it's the crazy thing with a rule like that is where the tour says you can do this, but you can't do it in this way. It creates a scenario where it's a judgment call, and whether it's a rules official, whether it's the PGA Tour, or whether it's a player, everyone is forced to, like you said, live in this gray area. I think it would be a much easier policy to just ban the equipment. Like you're only anchoring with a long putter. So ban anything over, I don't know, 42 inches, like whatever the number is. For me though, if I'm being honest, like, and this is one of the things I always think about. I look at the way Bryson DeChambeau putts, and I know it's not the same style, and I know it's a short putter, and I know all of those things. But if you look at the way he putts, it looks like he has a hell of a lot more of an advantage at keeping the putter face square than anyone using a broomstick putter would, even if they were anchoring to their chest intently. So if the PGA Tour or any of the governing bodies are going to talk about rules in putting, I think the way Bryson putts deserves more scrutiny than the way a guy like Bhatia putts. But again, it's all just a judgment call, and it's all just the eyeball test. It could look vastly different hole to hole, right? Like Bhatia could look like he's in violation of the rule on the 14th hole, and on the 15th hole look like he's not even holding it anywhere near his body. So it's such a sticky situation. I'm not crazy about it, obviously, as you can tell.
Yeah, that's why they need to be, the PGA Tour needs to be really careful when they rule down. Because if they come down and say, like you just said, that he could be different on, it seems like it's different hole by hole, right? If you come down and tell Akshay that he can't putt like this and needs to putt differently, then you're making an example out of him, right? And that's what you have to go with. So I think you really need to be careful on how you rule this. It's really, really tricky spot, because if you do rule on this and you make a rule, it could create more gray area, right? Because I know D-Rap was talking about it. Daniel Rapport was talking about how you need to see daylight. And that was his whole term. You need to be able to see daylight between the body and top of the putter. And that is not a hard and fast white line rule. That I think makes sense in principle, but it also can create more gray area. So I don't know exactly what the answer is.
And is completely dependent. Like, yeah, I like the spirit of that because it feels like it's more specific, but it's entirely dependent on what the player is wearing. Imagine a guy like Jason Day who wears Malbon, who, some weeks it looks like he's wearing a paper bag out there. Like, how are you going to be able to like enforce a rule like that on a player who's wearing baggier clothing? Like, it's just not possible. Like, it has to go back to the equipment in my mind. It has to be long putters are either allowed or they're not allowed. And that's about as far as you can go with it without having to make really, I think any decision that the tour made, if they were to penalize a player, would be scrutinized far more than any of the individual scrutiny that a player like Akshay has received on social media from it. And at the end of the day, he won. So, who do you think he cares what people are saying on social media about him anchoring or not?
Oh yeah, he's not even seeing it, and nobody in his camp, I don't even think, is even seeing it, right? And they're not even going to talk about it. But don't. That makes me think about the whole Malbon thing. You see more and more athletes going with them, right? And I think it was Sanjay Yam who had looked like he had balloon pants on over the weekend. So don't get me started on that whole idea of shifting to a different golf attire, right?
Yeah, there's definitely been a change in golf fashion over the last 3 or 4 years, and it's going to a more baggy. It's going more baggy in general. So let's talk about Daniel Berger for a second. Yeah, early 90s, literally. I mean, early to mid 90s. That's definitely what players were wearing more regularly. I'm curious. Before we came on here, we were talking a little bit about Daniel Berger. He had led all through the tournament. It was his tournament to lose coming down the stretch. Like we said, he had at one point over Bhatia a 5-stroke lead. I believe he got up to 15 or 16 under. Was this a collapse, or was this just a glitch where timing just kind of wasn't on his side?
Yeah, I don't know if I would put it in the collapse territory, right? I mean, Akshay chased him down, right? Akshay shoots 31 with 4 birdies and an eagle on the back 9. You almost say, what can you do, to a sense, right? Daniel Berger had the lead all week. He shot a low number on Thursday, and he just kept it going. He's a guy that's won on the PGA Tour numerous amounts of times, and so he's a proven commodity in that sense. So I don't know if I would put it in the Shane Lowry like collapse that we saw last week, but I just think it's really interesting because it that golf course is so difficult, right? And Daniel Berger ripped it up pretty much all week, right? And he showed what needs to be done at the Arnold Palmer Invitational, and then it just kind of caught up to him, right? And what I really think is extremely impressive about Daniel Berger is on 18, when he has a 13-footer, all of a sudden Akshay Bhatia has the lead almost by himself, right? And Berger has a 13-footer to force a playoff, and Berger knocks it in the center of the cup. So I just think that's wildly impressive out of Daniel Berger. So to answer your question, no, I wouldn't call this a collapse in Berger.
Yeah, I agree completely. I was seeing a little bit of that on social media, but after yesterday's final round. But man, he played well. A lot of people don't realize he had a broken finger last year. He broke his finger last year around the BMW, I believe. And he's really just been working to get back into form. This is a guy who he's won a handful of times on tour. He's won the FedEx St. Jude twice, I believe. And I think he might have even done it back-to-back years. He's won the Amex before at Pebble Beach. Like this guy has won big events before. So I don't look at this as a collapse or any indictment of his play. I think, he's just continuing to work back into things. It was funny in his post-round interview yesterday. He talked about how, he's just not really crazy about playing out in California, so he doesn't do a lot of that. And this is kind of his build up and warm up is the Florida swing. I could see him contending again this coming weekend.
Yeah, certainly. And there's no reason for him not to, right? A guy like Daniel Berger, who's, like I talked about, a proven commodity. But yeah, I think we were looking to see a 30-year-old win on tour for the first time, right? I think you were looking at that this year.
Yeah. We're just waiting, and we'll have to wait another week because we got another 20-something in Winner's Circle. We got to give a quick shout out to you every week on our picks episode. I give you 3 players to choose from, typically long shots. I did that this past week. Sahith Theegala was one of those options, and he put together a very nice week. He had the low round on Sunday, shot 66, finishes top 10, T7.
Yeah, that's nice. Nice little victory that for me to run. My actual picks were pretty much dog shit, with Patrick Cantlay missing the cut and Jason Day also missing the cut. Between my 2 long shots, I was going between Billy Horschel and Jason Day. Of course, Billy Horschel finished T13 and played well all week, putted really well all weekend. And so, of course, that's how the cookie crumbles, right, to take the wrong guy. But at least I was good in the 3-man, at least, right?
Yeah, you said last week that you felt like Patrick Cantlay needed to show something. Maybe not win, but he needed to show something. Yeah. Are you starting to get concerned about where he sits in professional golf now?
I don't know if it's concerned is the right word. I would like him, though, to get the monkey off the back, right? It's been years since we've seen a win for Patrick Cantlay. And, a resident of Florida, it seems like he's most comfortable here. And so I think about Florida as being a really important time for Patrick Cantlay. And, the clock keeps rolling on, right?
Yeah. It's interesting. He's also in that.
He didn't particularly play well in the Ryder Cup, so I don't know where his career needs to go, right, at this point.
Yeah. Couple other streaks that we might as well talk about here while we're on it. Colin Morikawa, he's got 3 straight top 10 finishes. Scotty Scheffler finished T24. Now he's got a non-top 10 finish streak going. Seems to be a couple players that are trending the opposite way at the moment. Not saying Scotty Scheffler is toast or anything like that, but what do we make of those two guys and how they played this past weekend?
It's really encouraging for Colin Morikawa this season, right? Because he pops up for that win, and you play some of these longer, harder golf courses, and you're worried about where Colin Morikawa goes, right? Especially at the Genesis, I was really interested about how he played, and he hasn't gone away at all, and he's only heightened his powers, right? And that's a guy that hadn't won a couple of years, kind of similar to Patrick Cantlay. Didn't play his best in the Ryder Cup, and you weren't really sure where this guy is going to go, and he has stamped, proved, and delivered that he's going to be on this PGA Tour. And I would say a very, I don't know about close to a lock for this President's Cup team as they go to face off the world this year.
Yeah, I agree. Really good to see him playing and contending. Obviously, his ball striking is second to almost none on tour, right? Like that's the thing. That's his signature. He's contending every week. I remember we did this show, I don't know, a year or two ago, and we were talking about he had been contending but not winning. And you and I kind of had this little mini debate about, how many wins would he have had if Scotty Scheffler hadn't won? Because it was while he was racking up wins left and right. And it's just really interesting how, it's all about timing and playing your best at the right time when the right people are in the field in the right spots. And it's hard to win on PGA Tour. So, at the end of the day, I'm not alarmed by what Scotty's doing, but I'm really encouraged by what I'm seeing out of Colin Morikawa week in and week out now.
Yeah, I know. He's a guy you watch in person, or at least for me, and enamored with the golf swing, right? And he's a guy you watch and you say, I'm shocked this guy doesn't win more, right? I think he might be. He's right up there for guys I watch in person versus on TV and say, wow, look at that golf swing. But yeah, another guy broke a streak this week, right? Rory McIlroy had to withdraw from the API with a back injury. Josh, 13 years since his last with WD on tour.
Yeah, really interesting. He said he tweaked it while he was warming up, and then it just kind of stiffened up, and eventually it was starting to spasm a little bit. So he just didn't want to push it. He kind of flirted with the idea of playing anyway and playing through it, but ultimately decided to hang it up because he wanted to be okay for the Masters and the players, which makes complete sense. I'm not worried, but this is one of those things where, once as these players, and you look at how Rory McIlroy swings the golf club, he's not a 20-something-year-old guy anymore, right? Like he's in his mid-30s. And, when you swing as violently as they do, I think Rory is actually that kind of a prime candidate to point to and say he's getting to that point now where this could happen from time to time, and it's probably not a big deal and it's probably okay, but happens. Hopefully he's back next week here at the Players and he'll be all right, ready to roll.
I will say it's all credit to Rory for actually WDing, right? Because you can just tell that Rory is a guy who is very proud, right? In his illustrious PGA Tour career, he's only withdrawn now twice. So he's not going to be a guy that says, oh, my back is hurting a little bit, I'm going to withdraw. No, he plays through a lot of this stuff. So I think it's pretty credible for Rory McIlroy to say, hand up, there's a problem here. I'm not going to play. Because, and also, Josh, he really wasn't that far out of it. I think he was 9 strokes out, going into that round on Saturday, which he's not in it, I wouldn't say, but he's not out of it. He throws down a round, he can get himself in there. So I think it's got to be a really tough decision for Rory, but I think it's really cool that, Rory is not this guy that's going to say, oh, my left big toe is hurting, I'm not going to play. But he's this guy that plays through this kind of stuff with only 2 withdrawals in his career.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the he's not an elder statesman, but he does more than the rest of the guys that are in their 30s. He does approach the game a bit like an elder statesman in that he probably wouldn't have withdrawn if this happened to him 10 years ago, right? But
Yeah.
He's in a place now where he's admitted that he's not going to play golf forever, and it doesn't even really seem like he's going to play a serious amount of golf on tour much past 40. So, I think
Right.
it's him picking his spots as usual, and I think making the right decision for the big picture, like he tends to do on a week in, week out basis. So good on him for doing that, and hopefully this isn't something that crops back up or anything like that. Will Zalatoris is a great example of what back injuries can morph into over time, even after healing. It's can't do much in golf without the spine, man. And that's just, one of those things where you got to keep that back healthy. And if it's not, you're really not going to be able to play at the level that these guys play week in and week out.
Yeah, it's, definitely need to see Rory at the Masters, right? Need to see him defending that green jacket and putting that green jacket on probably someone else or himself,
Yeah.
right? So it's good for Rory that he's going to take some time to recover. I'm going to be really interested to see, what he's like at the Players when he gets ready to tee it up. He hasn't said anything. We haven't heard anything.
Yeah.
We probably won't hear anything. Knowing Rory McIlroy, you don't really hear much out of that camp, right? They keep things pretty sealed and pretty close to the hip, right? So it's going to be really interesting going forward.
Yeah. Let's talk about Justin Thomas. We saw him in action briefly this past week, fires a pair of 79s. Then, if the golf wasn't going to make some headlines for him, he decided to make some headlines for himself by criticizing the greens, talking about how they were going to be dead by Sunday. And you and I both commented they looked more brown on Sunday than some of the other weeks here we've seen on tour. But I think the greens, from my perspective, one, drives me crazy when we listen to players talk about how the greens are going to be dead or they're too fast or they're this, that, or the other thing. Fast greens are one of the only mechanisms that the tour has week in and week out, and the course guys have week in and week out to try to throw a wrench in these guys' plans so they don't just shoot 30 under par every week. Like the speed of greens and hardness of greens is consequential. The other thing too is it just feels like such small potatoes listening to somebody after they shoot 79 complain about how the greens are, especially at a place like Bay Hill. This is Arnold Palmer's, like this is his it felt beneath JT, excuse me, to be making those comments. But what'd you make of it all? What'd you make of how his comments were received, and then what the greens actually look like on Sunday?
Yeah, I don't think I'm as hard on JT, right, for saying this. You have a guy that shoots 8 over par, right? And you stuff a microphone in his face, he's going to say something like that, right? And this isn't the first time or the last time in a few weeks where a guy's going to say something about the greens or say something about the golf course in general. We see week in, week out on the PGA Tour. These guys are going to talk about course conditions. And I think if you ask him about it, I think he was asked about it too. If you ask him those questions, they're going to answer truthfully, right? So I think it's reasonable in my opinion, for JT to say that. It's nice to have him back. He's a guy I think the PGA Tour missed. He's one of those guys where, you're going to be able to use him for marketing purposes. He's going to talk about the tour. He's going to talk about golf. People love him. So I think he's a spot where it's good to have him back. And I think it's ultimately just kind of like, well, he wasn't necessarily wrong talking about the green because in a way I think Smiley Coffin put a picture of him up on Sunday too. And it just kind of heightened that talk, right? Where people were talking about how these greens were kind of lost in a way, and they were kind of burned and stuff. So I think it's definitely a talking point, but I don't give JT any problems for talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, I for one like the way the greens were because we saw it matter come down the stretch. Obviously, we saw the putt that Berger ran it about 6 feet by. I think it was on 16 or 17. Fast greens, hard greens that they can't just fly and stop, no matter what. That's what makes golf more interesting coming down the stretch. These birdie fests where everything is just a swamp and the ball lands and it's like flypaper. It's not that entertaining. Like it gets boring really fast that way. So I'm good with it, but we're going to keep hearing things like this. I don't think JT is going to be Mr. 79. I'm not worried about his game coming back around. I think that's going to come back around mighty quickly. But just an interesting way to start things off. But those weren't the only storylines in golf this past weekend. John Daly II, he had a pretty good weekend down in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, he had a really good weekend. Right on Saturday, we saw him tie for the lead at one point, right? And I think the whole golf world was talking about him, right? This opposite field event is not something that's talked about that much. So piping John Daly the second in there and having him play good golf, it really shows where this event needs it and stuff. So it was unfortunate on Sunday. He fired back 940, right, and finished T37. So it just kind of, I think if you were to just box score watch, right, you'll say that John Daly didn't play that well this week, but he did. He just had a bad stretch of golf, right, where he made a few bogeys in a row. But yeah, still really mightily impressive for John Daly, his first PGA Tour event too.
Yeah, very impressive. Definitely wasn't the expectation to see a 1 or a T1 next to his name at any point in that event. But speaking of T1 or 1, Jon Rahm finally gets a win. Live Hong Kong, shoots 66, 62, 65, 64. It's his first win since 2024, and I believe it should get him inside the top 30 in OWGR. I didn't look this morning, but he's, like we've talked about a million times before, I wasn't surprised. He is one of the, I would say, 5 best golfers in the world. He's had a pile of runner-up finishes over there. Kudos to him. He's had a lot of remarks lately that have been analyzed to death. So we can get into those if you want. But what'd you make of his performance overall?
Yeah, it's third career live win, right? Didn't win it all last year, but came in the top 10 every time. The 4 aces get back on the board, right? They win the team event. And I think what's more interesting about the golf, I think it's talked about a lot with, this is going to be talking about a lot with live, and we're going to talk about it more. But Rahm, before the event, admitted basically that this isn't a golf tournament. He talked about how the fans make it and the fans are crazy in Hong Kong. And like I said, he basically said the term, this isn't a golf tournament. And I just think that's really, really interesting from Jon Rahm, because all of the criticism about live has been, well, this isn't actual golf. This is exhibition golf. And you hear it from us and you hear it from other people too. And I think to a little bit of an extent, Jon Rahm said the quiet part out loud, where this might not necessarily be the most competitive golf landscape right now, but the fans are into it. And that's what this means.
Yeah, he's just said so many things in the last 2 weeks. We talked last week about the deal that he turned down with the DP World Tour to return there. He didn't like the terms, but kind of said at the same time, if they made one tiny adjustment to the terms, he'd be willing to go back. At the end of the day, I just settle into, and of course, the points you made about what is a live golf tournament, that, that criticism that you laid on it, I think is pretty fair and about what matches reality at this point. Like, great that he won, but it doesn't really turn heads. Anthony Kim's win is still 1,000 times bigger in golf. It's 1,000 times bigger story in golf. Yeah. And at the end of the day, like, live is able to exist and continue operating because it doesn't have to operate under the traditional terms of turning a profit and being a business that operates with normal credibility. Like, they say what they want, they do what they want, and they're operating in their own reality, so to speak. So
right.
If that's what makes them happy, then that's what makes them happy. And for the players that want to continue to play over there, happy as hell for them. It doesn't really change anything. I would say if I were on the live comms team, I would tell Jon Rahm to say less. Like, don't talk about this kind of stuff. Like, don't say things that can even vaguely be, turned into, our tournaments aren't real golf tournaments. Like, because that's exactly what if you listen to that soundbite, that's exactly what he said. He talks about, it doesn't even really feel like a golf tournament. Yeah, well, because it isn't really a golf tournament, I guess, is what people are going to take from that. But I'm sure we'll hear from plenty of people on TikTok and YouTube after this who say that we're crazy and live is the most serious golf product in the world and it's the best thing and the best players play on live. But, I think we can all just kind of live outside of that and acknowledge reality, which is that it just isn't as serious a product as the PGA Tour.
Yeah, I think Kevin Kisner delivered a pretty good blow to live over the weekend, right? Kevin Kisner, who year on NBC now, a former PGA Tour player, announced that he's going to be joining Foreplay. He's going to be joining the Barstool podcast, right, talking about golf and continue to do the NBC stuff. And if you know Kevin Kisner, he's an awesome talking head on NBC and really, really good golf personality. But he talked about how he was approached a few years ago about LIV, and the number wasn't high enough for him to go to LIV. And he's very thankful that he didn't do it, because as he quotes, he talks about how he'd have Anthony Kim beating the wheels off of him, and he's playing in Hong Kong at 2 a.m. And with 45 people watching. So it's pretty good that Kevin Kisner decided to stay, but that just shows where LIV's at with, the tape delay golf and, not having a ton of viewership. They went on to talk about how Anthony Kim won, and still the viewership wasn't that good. The biggest possible story in LIV history, right, that they could have. They couldn't draw it up any better, and the viewership still wasn't great, right? So I think LIV is in a really tough spot. They had their best story ever a few weeks ago, and they're not really reaping the benefits off of it. So we'll see where they go from here.
Yeah, with the viewership thing is really interesting, because we'll see all kinds of commentary on social media, people talking about how, they're successful in media because they're doing the whole global thing, and they're worried about growing golf across the whole planet, and the PGA Tour is just obsessed with the United States. The thing with that is like, there's a reason why the PGA Tour, so much of its revenue comes from media rights, because that is the most important piece of the puzzle. You can have, the PGA Tour could sell 200,000 tickets every week to every single event, and they still wouldn't be able to balance the budget without the media, without everything that they're earning from media as well. So like, that's the thing where it just gets lost on me when, people try to talk about LIV as an equally legitimate product. When you look at how many people are watching on streaming services, and you look at how many people are engaging with the content on social media, like, the math just doesn't math. So, it's one of those things where, we could sit here for 45 minutes and we could drill down on every single reason why LIV isn't as serious a product, but there's no reason to, because at the end of the day, the same dozen or 2 dozen people are going to show up in the comments and say we're crazy, and say that LIV is the most serious thing in the world, and that's where the best players in the world play, when that just isn't reality. So I guess, without continuing to go down that rabbit hole, that's where I'll leave it.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've talked about forever with LIV still applies, right? It's an unserious league, and I think to me, that's what it comes down to.
Yeah. All right. Well, in a couple days, we'll be back talking about the players. So that's going to do it for this episode. That show will be the picks and preview episode. It'll be on Wednesday. Follow us on YouTube or TikTok if you want to see that, or want to see more of what we're doing in between episodes. You can also let us know what we're thinking, or if you think we're crazy, especially when it comes to the LIV stuff, because, everybody seems to have an opinion about LIV. But hope everybody has a great week, and you know the drill. Whether it's down the middle or out of bounds, keep on swinging.